You'll freeze to death out here. Ryan muttered to himself, eyes scanning the white wasteland. The storm howled around him, cutting through his jacket as if it were paper. The cold was unbearable, and yet he kept moving, searching. He had a mission, but he couldn't ignore the faint, strange shape in the snow. Something didn't look right. He jogged over, heart pounding. There, lying motionless in the snow, was an alien woman. Her skin was a deep, vibrant green, and her delicate features were twisted in pain. No one was nearby. She had clearly been abandoned. No one cared. She looked like she was already dead. Ryan dropped to his knees, breathing heavily. The storm was so fierce now, it was hard to see. He checked her pulse, weak but steady. God, you're still alive, he whispered. But for how much longer? He didn't know, but he couldn't leave her to die here. His instincts kicked in. Without a second thought, he pulled her into his arms. She was cold, so cold. He couldn't feel her warmth, but he knew he had to move fast. The wind was howling now, making it hard to hear anything but the sharp cry of the storm. He had to get her to safety. He could hear her shallow breath, almost lost in the blizzard. Her skin looked alien, completely foreign. But there was something about her, something that made Ryan's heart race. Her eyes fluttered open, golden, like molten metal, yet filled with confusion and pain. She didn't speak at first. Ryan took a step forward, the weight of her in his arms pulling at his body. She was fragile, delicate. She could have been anyone, but she wasn't. Who are you? She asked in a voice so soft it almost didn't seem real. Her voice barely cut through the noise of the storm, but Ryan could hear her perfectly. Does it matter? He replied, focused on keeping his balance. I'm here to help you. Her eyes narrowed as if trying to make sense of his words. Why? She whispered, still incredulous. Ryan hesitated. Why? Was it out of duty? Or was it something deeper? He didn't have the answer. He only knew that this woman, whoever she was, didn't deserve to die in the cold. Because you're not alone, he said simply. The wind grew fiercer, and Ryan knew he needed to get her inside. The mission would have to wait. He had made a choice, one that would change everything. As he trudged through the snow, Ellora's golden eyes never left him, still uncertain, but something in her seemed to soften. What had she been through? Why had she been left behind? These were questions he couldn't answer yet, but as he carried her forward, he could feel something shifting between them, something more than just survival, something that would eventually draw them closer, something that would change the course of their lives forever. Ryan's heart pounded as he struggled against the harsh winds, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air. The ship wasn't far now, he thought, though the weight of the alien woman in his arms felt like a heavy burden. He had to keep moving. Ellora was still unconscious, her golden eyes closed, her breath faint and shallow. Her body was almost lifeless, but Ryan couldn't give up. Not yet. As they finally reached the shelter of his ship, Ryan stumbled inside, collapsing onto the cool metal floor. He quickly laid Ellora on a cot, his hands trembling as he worked to stabilize her. He checked her pulse again, relieved to feel it still steady, though weak. The storm outside howled louder now, battering the ship's hull like a constant reminder of the harsh world they were on. Inside, the warmth from the ship's heating system was a stark contrast to the cold outside. Ellora stirred, her eyelids flickering. Ryan stepped back, his breath catching in his throat. Slowly, her eyes opened, that same golden hue searching the room. Where am I? She asked, her voice hoarse. Ryan kneeled beside her, his voice calm. You're safe. You're in my ship. I'm Ryan, a human. You were caught out there in the storm. I couldn't leave you behind. Ellora's gaze flickered over him, still wary, though a flicker of gratitude passed through her expression. You helped me, she whispered, as if the concept was foreign to her. Ryan nodded. Of course I did. It's what any decent person would do. Ellora's eyes narrowed, clearly trying to process his words. Decent? She asked, the word unfamiliar to her. Ryan smiled gently, though there was a weight in his chest. It means being good, doing what's right. It's just who we are, or at least, it's who I try to be. Ellora was silent for a moment, her gaze turning distant. We are not the same, she said softly, almost to herself. Ryan couldn't help but notice the sadness in her voice. No, we're not. But maybe that's what makes us stronger, you know? Being different doesn't mean we can't help each other. Ellora met his gaze, her golden eyes searching his face. Why did you save me? She asked, the question heavy in the air. Ryan hesitated, his thoughts racing. I couldn't just leave you there to die, he said simply. Everyone deserves to have someone care. Elora seemed to consider his words for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, she nodded. Perhaps you're right, she whispered. The silence between them grew, but it wasn't uncomfortable. There was something unspoken between them now, something more than just survival. Elora's fragile form lay on the cot, but there was a strength to her that Ryan couldn't ignore. He could see it in her eyes. She was not just a helpless alien. She was someone with a past, a story he couldn't yet understand. And he wanted to. He wanted to understand her, wanted to know what had brought her to this point. But for now, the only thing he could do was be there for her. You're safe now, he repeated, more to himself than to her. But Elora's next words changed everything. You do not know what you've gotten yourself into, human, she said quietly, her voice full of a dark, knowing edge. Ryan frowned. What do you mean? She didn't answer right away. Her gaze turned toward the window, where the storm still raged outside. My people, they will come for me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryan's heart skipped a beat. What did that mean? Who was she really? What had he just gotten himself into? Ryan sat across from Elora, watching her carefully. The storm outside still raged, but inside the warmth of the ship, the tension was palpable. Elora had been silent since she spoke those cryptic words about her people coming for her. Ryan wasn't sure what to make of it. He didn't know who she was, not really, but there was something in her eyes that made him feel like there was much more to her than he could understand. He broke the silence. Who are you, Elora? He asked softly, his voice tinged with curiosity and concern. Elora didn't look at him right away. She seemed lost in thought, her golden eyes distant. After a long moment, she spoke. I am the daughter of a people who do not forgive, she said, her voice quieter than usual. Ryan frowned. Forgive? What does that mean? Elora turned her gaze to him then, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and something deeper, regret, maybe. My people, they rule across many worlds. But they are not kind. We are taught that strength is everything, and weakness is punished, she explained. Ryan's mind raced as he tried to understand. And you're weak because you needed help? Elora shook her head slowly. No, she replied firmly. I am not weak, but I was abandoned. And that is the greatest shame. Ryan could see the pain in her eyes. She wasn't just talking about physical weakness. She was talking about something much deeper. The pride of her people, their expectations. And here she was, a stranger in a world that wasn't her own, relying on someone she barely knew to help her. He felt a sudden surge of sympathy for her, but also a sense of responsibility. I didn't abandon you, Ryan said softly. Elora's gaze softened, just for a moment. No, she agreed quietly. You didn't. But you do not understand. I am not meant to be saved. Ryan sat up straighter, confusion clouding his thoughts. Then why did you help me? Why did you save me from the storm? Elora's eyes flickered with a mix of emotions, regret, surprise, and something else, something he couldn't name. Because I had no choice, she said simply. Ryan was about to speak, but Elora continued. I was sent here on a mission, but things went wrong. Now, I am a traitor to my people, and they will come for me. No one will protect me but myself. But I owe you something, and I cannot ignore that. Ryan felt a wave of unease wash over him. He had no idea what he was getting himself into. But one thing was clear. This was no ordinary alien. Elora was someone important, someone who had power, and had lost it all. You don't owe me anything, Ryan said, shaking his head. I'm just trying to help. Elora looked at him, her golden eyes piercing through him, as if weighing his every word. Maybe, she said softly, but you've already done more than anyone else ever would. Ryan leaned back, staring at her. He wasn't sure what to think, but something told him this was just the beginning. There was a lot more to Elora than met the eye, and he was getting pulled deeper into whatever this was. Something that would change both their lives forever. Ryan sat quietly, his thoughts racing. The hum of the ship's systems was the only sound that filled the room, but his mind was elsewhere. Elora's words echoed in his head, and for the first time, he felt the weight of what he had gotten involved in. A traitor. That was how she saw herself. He couldn't help but wonder what had happened to her, what kind of mission she had been on. Who was she really? You can't keep running, he finally said, breaking the silence. Elora looked at him, her golden eyes reflecting the storm that still raged outside. I don't have a choice, she said quietly. Ryan shook his head. There's always a choice. But running, it's not the answer. Not for you. Not for anyone. Elora remained silent, but Ryan could see the inner turmoil in her eyes. She was strong. That much was clear, but she was also burdened by something heavy, something that seemed to weigh her down, like an invisible chain. She had been abandoned, betrayed by her own people. And now she was here, in his ship, a stranger on a strange world. I can't stay here forever, she whispered, almost to herself. Ryan leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. You don't have to. But you don't have to face this alone, either. Elora turned her gaze to him, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something new in her eyes. Trust? Maybe. Or maybe it was just the smallest glimmer of hope. Why would you help me? She asked, her voice soft. Ryan paused for a moment, searching for the right words. He wasn't sure why. It wasn't just because it was the right thing to do, though that was part of it. It wasn't even because he felt sorry for her. It was something deeper, something he couldn't explain. Because you're not alone, he said simply. And I'm not going to let you face whatever's coming by yourself. Elora studied him for a long time, as if weighing his words, trying to determine if they were genuine. Finally, she nodded. I don't know what I'm asking of you, Ryan, she said, her voice quieter now, almost uncertain. But, she trailed off, her golden eyes glimmering with a mix of sadness and something else, something that almost felt like gratitude. Ryan smiled, a small, reassuring smile. You don't have to ask. You just have to trust me. Elora looked away then, her gaze distant. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, the kind that held the promise of something more, something that neither of them fully understood yet. Ryan had no idea what would come next, but he knew one thing. He couldn't turn his back on her now. And for the first time since they met, Elora didn't look quite as alone. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside the ship, there was a flicker of calm, a flicker of possibility. Ryan stood by the window, watching the storm through the ship's thick glass. The winds howled, but inside, the warmth was almost too much to bear. Elora had been asleep for hours now, her breathing steady. But Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. The air outside was thick with tension, and though he hadn't said it out loud, he knew Elora's words were more than just a warning. She wasn't just a fugitive. She was a target, and he had brought her into his life. The thought weighed heavily on him. As the minutes passed, the sense of urgency only grew. He turned away from the window and walked to the console. His fingers hovered over the controls. He was no expert in alien technology, but this ship was his responsibility now. Elora needed help, and he needed to get her somewhere safe. Somewhere far from the storm, far from whatever enemies were after her. The ship's systems hummed softly as he navigated through the various controls, his eyes darting over the unfamiliar displays. He wasn't sure where he was going yet, but it had to be far enough to keep them both out of harm's way. He glanced over at Elora. She was still sleeping, but even in her sleep, she looked troubled. The soft rise and fall of her chest was the only sign of peace. He wanted to believe she was safe now, but he knew that wasn't true. You're not alone, he whispered again, though she wasn't awake to hear it. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe that he could protect her, that he could help her find a way out of this mess. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized he didn't have all the answers. In fact, he had barely any. Elora had barely spoken about her past, and when she had, it was in cryptic words that only made things more complicated. He needed to know more, but he didn't want to push her. She had already been through enough. As he sat back in the pilot's chair, his thoughts drifted back to her words. I am not meant to be saved. He couldn't understand it. Why would she think that? Was it because of her people? Her background? The harsh culture she came from? What had she really been sent here to do? What had gone wrong? These questions burned in his mind. But for now, they were unanswered. Elora stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. Ryan looked at her, his gaze softening. You're awake, he said gently. Elora blinked and sat up, glancing around the ship with a quiet confusion. Where are we going? She asked, her voice still hoarse. Ryan hesitated. He didn't have a destination in mind, not yet. But he knew one thing for sure. He would do everything he could to protect her. We're going to figure that out, he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Elora studied him for a moment, her golden eyes filled with curiosity and something else. Perhaps it was hope, or maybe it was the barest hint of trust. Ryan held her gaze, wondering just how much she was willing to share. "You don't have to do this alone, Elora," he said quietly. "You have a choice now." She didn't respond right away. For a moment, there was only the hum of the ship's engines and the sound of the storm outside. Then, finally, she spoke. "I hope you're right," she whispered. Ryan nodded, his mind racing. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let her face this alone. Not now. Not ever. Ryan sat in the cockpit, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. The storm outside had finally died down, leaving behind a cold, eerie silence. Elora sat across from him, her golden eyes still holding that distant, troubled look. She hadn't said much since they had left the storm behind. Her gaze seemed to wander to the darkened viewports, as if searching for something, someone. Ryan had never been one to push, but the silence between them felt like it was slowly building a wall. He couldn't shake the feeling that Elora was still hiding something from him. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked gently, his voice breaking the quiet. Elora looked at him, her eyes sharp and focused, as if his question had caught her off guard. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "I'm fine," she said, but there was a hesitation in her voice that made Ryan wonder if she was lying. She turned away again, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the table in front of her. Ryan didn't press her further. He had learned, over time, that some things had to be revealed on their own terms. But the longer the silence stretched, the more Ryan felt the weight of it. The weight of her past. "You know you don't have to do this alone," he said, his voice soft but firm. Elora glanced up at him, her eyes searching his face. "I don't know how to trust anyone," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Ryan could feel the sincerity in her words, the raw vulnerability behind them. She was a warrior, a survivor, but beneath that exterior was someone who had been hurt, abandoned. Ryan wanted to reach out, to offer her something more than just words, but he didn't want to push her. Elora had been betrayed by those closest to her, and Ryan could only imagine how much that had scarred her. He leaned back in his seat, giving her space. "I get it," he said, his voice calm and understanding. "Trust takes time, but you don't have to carry everything on your own. You've got me, and I'm not going anywhere." Elora was silent for a long moment. Ryan wasn't sure if she would respond, but then, to his surprise, she spoke. "I wish it were that simple," she said quietly, her eyes distant again. "My people, they don't forgive. If they find me, they'll make an example out of me." Ryan didn't know what to say to that. He had no idea what kind of power or influence Elora's people had, but the fear in her voice was enough to tell him that this wasn't just about running away. This was about survival. Elora was running from something much bigger than herself, and Ryan knew that his role in this was more than just helping her escape the storm. He was now part of whatever this was, part of her fight. "Then we'll figure it out," he said, determination settling in his chest. "We'll find a way to protect you." Elora's gaze softened, and for the first time, Ryan saw a flicker of something in her eyes, hope. "Thank you," she whispered. It was the first time she had said those words to him, and it meant more than he could put into words. He wasn't sure how they would face what was coming, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let her face it alone. Ryan sat in the pilot's seat, his hands resting on the controls, but his mind was elsewhere. Elora had been quieter than usual ever since their conversation. The ship's low hum was the only sound in the room, and it made the silence feel even heavier. He glanced over at her, sitting across from him, her eyes staring out into the stars. She had been through so much, and yet, she carried it all like it was nothing. The weight of her past still hung in the air between them, but Ryan knew it wasn't something she would open up about easily. She had already given him more than she probably intended when she confessed the danger she was in, but that was only the beginning of the truth. Ryan didn't want to push her, but the question gnawed at him. Who were her people? What was it that made her so sure they wouldn't let her go? "You know," he began, his voice breaking the quiet, "we still haven't really talked about what happens when they come for you." Elora shifted slightly, but her eyes remained on the stars. She didn't answer right away, and Ryan wasn't sure if she would. He didn't know if she had the answers, or if she even wanted to share them. He pressed on anyway. "I'm not going to leave you to face this alone," he said, trying to make it clear that he meant it. Elora let out a soft sigh, her breath faint against the hum of the ship. "I know you're not," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you don't understand. My people, they don't forgive. If they find me, there will be no escape. Not for me. Not for anyone." Ryan's heart clenched at the fear in her voice, a fear so raw and honest it sent a shiver down his spine. "But why? Why are they coming after you?" he asked gently. Elora finally turned to look at him, her golden eyes intense and filled with a kind of pain that made him feel like he was seeing her for the first time. "I was supposed to be their weapon," she said, the words heavy, each one falling like a stone. "A tool to further their power. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't follow their orders." Ryan felt his stomach twist. Elora wasn't just running from her past. She was running from everything she had once been. She had defied her people, the very ones who had shaped her. And now they would make her pay. "I didn't ask for this," she continued, her voice shaking slightly. "I didn't want to be the person they made me into." Ryan could see the guilt in her eyes, but there was something else there too, a spark of determination, a quiet strength that was buried deep within her. "You're not who they made you," Ryan said, his voice firm. "You're not what they want you to be." Elora's gaze softened, just slightly. "Maybe," she whispered. Ryan stood up, walking over to where she sat. He had no idea how to solve this, how to fight the forces that were after her, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let her go through this alone. He extended his hand to her, offering her something she hadn't had in so long: trust. "We'll figure this out," he said, his voice steady. Elora looked at his hand for a moment. Then slowly, almost hesitantly, she took it. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely audible, but Ryan could hear the gratitude in it. It was the first time she had let herself be vulnerable, and Ryan knew that this moment, this small act of trust, was the beginning of something they both needed, something they could only face together. Ryan navigated the ship through the dark expanse of space, his hands moving instinctively over the controls. The soft hum of the engines was a constant reminder that they were far from safety, far from the storm that had nearly claimed Elora's life. Elora sat quietly beside him, her golden eyes fixed on the view ahead, lost in her thoughts. The silence between them had shifted since their last conversation. There was a new understanding, an unspoken bond that had formed between them. But that bond only deepened the uncertainty Ryan felt about what was to come. Elora had opened up to him in ways she never had before, but she was still holding something back, something he wasn't sure she was ready to share. He couldn't help but wonder what kind of power her people had, and how far they would go to track her down. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everything that was coming for them both. Elora broke the silence, her voice softer than usual. "How far do you think we can go?" she asked, her words carrying a weight Ryan hadn't expected. He glanced over at her, sensing the vulnerability in her tone. "As far as we need to," he replied, his voice steady. "We're not running anymore, Elora. We're fighting. We're figuring this out together." Elora's gaze met his, and for a moment, Ryan saw something in her eyes he hadn't noticed before. Hope, or at least the flicker of it. It wasn't much, but it was enough to push him forward. Elora's lips parted, but she didn't speak. Instead, she turned her attention back to the stars outside, her fingers gently tapping on the console. "I wish it were that simple," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Ryan didn't know what to say to that. He wished it were simple too, but he knew the truth: it wasn't. Elora had been running her entire life, and now, she was asking him to help her stop, to fight back. And he would. He would do whatever it took to make sure she didn't have to carry this burden alone. "We don't have to have all the answers right now," Ryan said after a beat, his voice soft but firm. "But we will figure it out. We'll make it through this. Together." Elora finally turned her head to look at him, her eyes studying his face, searching for something. Maybe reassurance, maybe a promise. Ryan didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let her face this alone. Not now, not ever. Elora let out a small sigh, the tension in her shoulders easing just a fraction. "I don't know how to believe in that," she admitted. "After everything, I don't know if I can trust anyone again." Ryan's heart sank a little. He understood. She had been betrayed by those who should have protected her, and now, trust was a hard thing for her to give. "You don't have to trust everyone," Ryan said quietly. "Just trust me. I'm not going anywhere." Elora didn't respond right away, but Ryan could see the change in her. The way her shoulders relaxed just a little more, the way her expression softened. Maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to believe him. The stars outside stretched on forever, but for the first time since they met, Ryan felt a sense of calm settle in his chest. They didn't have all the answers, and they didn't have a clear path forward, but they had each other. And for now, that was enough. The silence in the ship was almost comforting now, a soft hum of the engines the only sound in the stillness. Ryan glanced over at Elora, who was sitting quietly in the chair beside him, her gaze fixed once again on the stars outside the window. It had been a few days since their conversation, and though the tension had eased between them, there was still an air of uncertainty. They had been traveling for what felt like hours, the ship gliding through the vastness of space, and yet they hadn't gotten any closer to answers. Ryan knew that eventually, they would have to face what was coming. Elora's people weren't going to let her go that easily. He turned his attention back to the controls, his fingers dancing over the buttons as he tried to focus on the next step. They needed a plan, a place to hide, and a way to stay ahead of whatever was hunting her. But every time he thought about their next move, the weight of the situation pressed down on him. They weren't just running from a storm anymore. They were running from an entire civilization, one that didn't forgive. We're not going to make it, are we? Elora's voice broke through his thoughts. Ryan blinked in surprise and looked at her. She wasn't looking at him, her face still turned toward the window, but he could hear the frustration and fear in her voice. I don't know, he said honestly, but I won't stop trying, and I won't let them take you. Elora's eyes flickered toward him, and for a moment, Ryan thought he saw something in them, something that resembled gratitude. But it was gone so quickly, he couldn't be sure. She nodded slowly. I know, she whispered. But what if they find us? What if we can't outrun them? Ryan didn't have an answer. He could feel the uncertainty in her words, the fear that had been buried deep inside her for so long. She had been running, hiding, fighting her entire life. And now, she had no idea how to stop. Ryan leaned back in his seat, the weight of their situation settling in. He had no illusions about how difficult this would be, no false promises to offer. But what he could give her was his word. He would fight for her, no matter the cost. If they come, he said quietly, we'll face them together. We'll figure it out. Elora was silent for a long moment, and Ryan didn't push her. He knew it was hard for her to believe in anything, to trust anyone, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she was beginning to. She had already given him more than he expected when she chose to trust him with her life. And he wouldn't let that be in vain. The ship moved steadily through space, but Ryan felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on them both. There was still so much they didn't understand, so much they had yet to face. Elora had made it clear that her people would come for her, and that meant there was no turning back. But Ryan wasn't afraid of what might come. He was afraid of failing her. He glanced over at her again, his eyes softening. We'll be okay, he said, though he didn't quite believe it himself. Elora's lips parted as if to say something, but then she paused, as if considering her words carefully. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but steady. I hope you're right, she said, her gaze meeting his. And for the first time since he met her, Ryan saw something in her eyes that gave him hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep moving forward. Together,